full-time ministry here, or the permanent ministry here at Unity of Carlsbad. But we thought, since you don't know her and haven't heard her before, unless you've been to one of her 5 other churches that she served since 1990, and by the way, let me tell you what those are. She started right here in the Southwest region at the Unity Church of Tempe, Arizona. Then she went up to the West Central region and served in Santa Cruz, Palo Alto, Santa Rosa, and then retiring from Torrance. Actually, last Sunday was the last Sunday. So she is available, and we wanted you to hear her first. Her actual audition Sunday, as we did last Sunday for one of the other candidates, will be Sunday, October 6th. She serves on the Regional Ministers Board and also on the Unity Church of Alhambra Foundation as a director. And professionally, besides being a Unity minister, she is also a professional astrologer, a certified dream worker, and a reconnected healer, and the author of one of the best-selling metaphysical books of all time, The Unorthodox Life by RevKathyMcCall, which is available after the service. Please join me in welcoming, and by the way, she was also, a little personal stuff here, she was also, when I was the YOU consultant for the Southwest region for 8 years, she was my minister advisor, so I know her well and I love her. I'm so happy she could be here today. Please join me in welcoming Reverend Kathy McCall.
Thank you, Ken, for that. Wonderful to be with you on the stage. That was supposed to be up when he was introducing me. Okay. All right. And I usually don't work a PowerPoint while I'm speaking, so we'll see how that goes. First of all, I just want to thank everyone. Thanks to Mark, your board president, and to the board for making it possible for me to be here today, and all of you who've participated in some way in the service. I'm also grateful that Blair is here singing. Blair and I have known each other since like early 90s, yeah. So, we were on the board then, the regional board. He was president, and then I followed him onto the board, and our kids are friends in YOU and Uniteens, so it's wonderful to come full circle. And I'm always grateful to have a great musician because, confession, I cannot sing a note. I love working with musicians in churches, and I love the flow of the music, and I can hear it perfectly. I just can't get it from here out. And as if I needed proof of that, when my oldest son was 18 months old, I sang him a lullaby, and he doubled up his fist and gave me a black eye. It's a true story. And he turned out to be a musician. So he knew exactly what he was doing. So, when I was 5 years old, my house burned down. And after that, I began to think of God as fire. And part of the reason is because I knew it was going to happen 2 weeks before it did, and I was trying to warn my family. But who's going to listen to a 5-year-old about something like that, and what could be done anyway? And so what happened is my father was up late one night, and he had been drinking, and he fell asleep in a chair with a lit cigarette. And as divine intervention would have it, at that very moment, my brother walked through the front door returning from a date. He was 20 years old, and he saw the problem, and he got my dad. I doused the chair and my dad with water, got him out of the chair, took the chair out, threw it on the front lawn, and hosed it down, and then came back in, somehow got my dad up to bed. And then after a while, when he was ready to go to bed, he went out and got the chair out of the front yard and took it to a back screened-in porch and left it there and went up to bed. Well, the firemen told us that we all got out with only seconds to spare. We had a 3-story house at the time and a spiral staircase that just went almost immediately, but we got out just before it did. And the reason we were saved is because 3 weeks before, my dad and I went down to a little corner market, and we were just shopping, and we heard this barking, and they ended up bringing out a barrel basket of puppies. And my dad let me choose one, and we named her Taffy. And by 3 weeks, she had stopped barking at night. But that night, she barked and she barked. And my mother woke up and heard the crackling and got us up. And so the firemen, when they came, they rewarded her with a T-bone steak. Isn't that unbelievable how big that steak is compared to her? And the news article said, PUP saves SL, stands for Salt Lake, family of 5 from flames. So, and there's one more. This is me with my dog and my one doll that got saved. So, while we waited, part of the house wasn't burning yet. And, you know, I don't generally talk about astrology from the pulpit, but it enhances the story. So my father, who was a Leo, Leo's sign of leadership and believe in achievement, he runs back in to find something to save, and he ends up saving my brother's scrapbook with his high school sports achievements. He was best player at East High in Salt Lake. And so my brother, a more analytical Virgo type, runs back in, looks around, saves my father's glasses. My sister and I, both Cancerians, sign of home and family and nurturing, both watched from the safety of the house next door, my dog in my lap. And my mother, my very crazy, wonderful, eccentric Aquarian mother, ran back in, looked around for something to save, and off the top of a laundry basket grabbed her girdle. And we never let her hear the end of it. So from that night on, God and fire became connected for me. Partly because of this higher intelligence that somehow let me know what was going to happen. And also because it was so traumatic, I was just struck by the power that could come in and so drastically change our lives in one night. So not only was it traumatic, but it was about awe and power. And, you know, one man was very grateful to think about God in a new way. He was rushed off to Mercy Hospital and sent in for coronary surgery. And he made it through the surgery okay, and when he came to, he realized there was a sister of Mercy sitting by his bedside. And she patted his hand and said, "Mr. Smith, you've had surgery, but it all went well, you're going to be okay. But I need to ask you, Mr. Smith, how you're going to pay for your stay here. Do you have insurance?" And he said, "No, I don't, sister." She said, "Well, do you have, can you pay cash?" "No, I'm sorry, sister." "Well, do you have any relatives?" she persisted. He said, "No, just a sister who's a poor nun, you know, a poor nun." And he said, I'm trying to remember the word here. he said, spinster nun. And she said, no, Mr. Smith, I have to disagree with you. Nuns are not spinsters. We are married to God. And he said, well, in that case, just send the bill to my brother-in-law. So, you know, one of the most wonderful things about unity, I believe, is the teachings about God. That there is only one presence and one power. You know, we come here for various reasons. Music, maybe the social aspect, perhaps trying to make friends. But, you know, the bottom line is we're here about God. Whatever you call him or her. Most of us are seekers, and we long to know the divine. And sometimes we need divine comfort, or perhaps guidance, or prosperity, or we may have a health challenge and need healing. You know, I've got this IT band injury in my thigh right now, and I'm having to go to physical therapy to strengthen the muscle. And have you ever had to learn patience? Well, and I know as a spiritual community that you're having to learn some patience right now. Anytime a community is in transition, there's a need for patience. And, you know, because there's always challenges involved. So whatever our need is, we long to know God's presence and power, God's love and light. Do you feel that longing ever? So rather than any problem going on in your life, let's just keep focusing on God. A young woman brought her fiancé home to meet her parents, and he was a man who believed that God could help him out. And so after dinner, the father took the young man into his study and said, well, what are your plans? And the man said, well, I'm a theology student. Oh, well, that's admirable, but how are you going to take care of my daughter and buy her a house? And he said, well, I will study and God will provide. And the father went on, and how are you going to have children and support them? Well, God will provide. And this just went on. And finally, after a while, they left the study, and the young man went home. Father went into the mother, and she said, well, how'd it go? And he said, well, he has no money, and he has no employment plans, but on the other hand, he thinks I'm God. When I was applying for ministerial school back at Unity Village, in my entrance exams, I remember being asked the question, what is your favorite unity principle? And I answered that there's only one presence and one power in the universe, God the good, omnipotent. And they tried to trip me up. They played devil's advocate. They said, how can that possibly be when you can just go 2 blocks down the street and people are suffering, or you can turn on TV and there's people are being robbed and raped and murdered. There's all forms of evil. How can you possibly say there's only one presence and one power? I have no clue what I answered. I can't remember. I got into school, that was a word. But what I would answer now is that, you know, there is one presence and one power. There is God-mind, the unchanging, eternal, ever-present reality. And then there's the relative world of the 5 senses, that changing reality, in which we do suffer, we do experience pain and illness and evil. And yet, the more we focus on the one presence and one power, on the divine mind of God, the more our outer reality begins to change. And it makes all the difference. One presence and one power in the universe is the first and basic premise of unity. If anybody asks you, what is the main teaching of unity? That is it. There's one presence and one power, and it is a power of love. Einstein once said, the most important question we can ask ourselves is the universe a friendly place? And unity's answer to that is yes. Absolutely. God is absolute good. Children have some wonderful ideas and questions about God. The book Children's Letters to God has been around a while, but some of these comments are always great to hear. Dear God, in Sunday school they told us what you do. Who does it when you are on vacation? Love, Jane. Dear God, how did you know you were God? Charlene. Norma asks, Dear God, did you mean for the giraffe to look like that, or was it an accident? Nan asks, Dear God, who draws the lines around the countries? Dear God, is Reverend Coe a friend of yours, or do you just know him through business? Ruth M. writes, Dear God, I think the stapler is one of your greatest inventions. And finally from Eugene, Dear God, I didn't think orange went with purple until I saw the sunset you made on Tuesday. That was cool. Well, unity is in good company since the world's 5 major religions share the same belief that there's only one presence and one power. You know, Hinduism believes in one God, though it's called a polytheistic religion, but it really is not. It really believes only in one God, Brahman. And all of the other gods, they say, are expressions of Brahman. Just as we might say all of the archetypes in the collective unconscious are expressions of the divine. So Hinduism believes in one God. It's said that Buddhism doesn't believe in God. Recently I had a world religion program in my last church, and it was great. I invited leaders from the different religions to come and dialogue with me on Sunday morning. And when the Buddhist priest came from a big temple in downtown LA, the first question I asked him is, do Buddhists believe in God? And he said, oh, you're starting right out with the hard question. And I said, well, before you answer, let me explain about unity, because he wasn't really too familiar with unity. I said, we're not like traditional Christianity in many ways. And we believe in one presence and one power that is omnipotent, all power, omniscient, all-knowing, and omnipresent, ever-present. And we're also panentheistic. We believe that we are in God and God is in us, like the wave is in the ocean and the ocean is in the wave. And then I said, when I talk to kids about God, I love to talk about Star Wars and the Force. That we have this divine force that's present in all of life. And he said, that's so funny you would say Star Wars, because in my last class, I used the metaphor of Star Wars and the life force and all things to talk about our belief in God, or our not belief in God. And so it was this incredible moment of connection when we realized that the Buddhists don't believe in this the old Christian idea of the anthropomorphic God up in the sky with white hair and a beard, but they do believe in the life force in everything, as unity does. So that was an amazing connection. Also, of course, Judaism believes in only one God, and they don't name their God because their scripture says, thou shalt not take the name of God in vain. And so they call him Yahweh, but it's sort of a temporary name. And then Christianity, as you know, believes in one God, although, again, unity's approach is different, a God of love and not a punitive God. And then finally, Islam, they've borrowed a lot of their teachings from both Christianity and Judaism. but their bottom line is that there's only one presence and power, and that is, we call it Allah. They say Allah. And so we're in good company. We have our collective paths to God through whatever religious or spiritual tradition we embrace. And we also have our own more individual path to God, which is important for each of us to reflect upon. My path has been very eclectic, and not through a traditional church. I was raised in Salt Lake. My mother had been a Smith, a Mormon, and she was the first one outside her family to marry, or first one in her family to marry outside. She was a black sheep. So my brother and sister and I were not raised in that faith. And so I was unchurched, but she also was very metaphysical. So I had that background. And early on, I passionately studied the Eastern and Western mystical traditions and eventually found unity. And for me, that was like coming home, like it is for so many of us. But I found unity in Austin, Texas. I was there for a very short time. I was a single parent I had only one son at the time. He was 5. And we were going to be in Texas for about 3 months. And we found a unity church there. But what happened first is that I was in a grieving crisis. And I had been aware of unity, but I had never attended. So I didn't know who to call. I was alone in town and I didn't know anyone. And it occurred to me to call a unity minister. So when he heard me sobbing on the phone, he canceled his appointments that afternoon and helped me through a grieving process. It was very powerful. And then I started to attend his church for the 3 months there. And he was wonderful. He played ragtime piano. And he reignited this flame within me. And then I left that area, and later I remarried, had another son, and the 4 of us joined the Unity Church in Portland, Oregon. We were living across the water in Vancouver at the time. And it was such a profound moment, because I'd had a very difficult spiritual community I had left behind. So I wanted to call that minister in Austin and thank him. And I couldn't remember his name. So I called the church, told them the year. The person on the phone didn't remember either. I even talked to the minister. They couldn't figure it out. So I finally gave up until I was between my first and second year of ministerial school, and I happened to see him at a conference. I recognized him. His name is Jack Graff, and he was in Charlotte, North Carolina for a lot of years after that. But I went up to him and I said, you don't remember me, but when you served for the very short time in Austin, Texas, you helped me go through a grieving process. You canceled your appointments and you hung out with me and you reignited this flame in me over a few months. And I just want you to know what a difference it's made, because I'm now going into my second year of ministerial school. Well, he just started to cry. Tears just rolled down his cheeks. And it was just so important to be able to tell him what a difference he made, because he set me on a path that I'm still on. And so sometimes it's important to tell our good Samaritans, thank you. And some years back, when I heard that he'd passed, it really affected me, because I didn't know him that well, but he set me on this path, and it was profound. So I remain grateful for the difference he made in my life. Mark Twain tells about a time when he went through a spiritual change in his life after he moved to Carson City, Nevada. He wrote a letter back home and he said, "Carson City is a den of iniquity filled with wine, women, and song. Not a place for a good Presbyterian. Therefore, I no longer am one." So there's a spiritual practice for this first principle of unity, one presence and one power. And that spiritual practice we call practicing the presence of God. And I want to just speak to 3 ways of doing that. The first is that we just think about the presence of God and feel it. And so right now, do you feel that presence of God moving in and through this room, this sacred space?
Yes.
And so we pause and we think, we feel God breathing through us. Feel God seeing through our eyes. And as we do that, we feel the presence. And so just try sometimes throughout your day to pause and feel the presence of God. Secondly, we practice the presence of God by looking for the blessing of the good in all things. Because wherever we find good, we find God. And if we have a tragedy, we can't in the moment necessarily see the blessing. We may have to wait a while, but it's always there to be found. Out of the tragedy of my house burning down, I had a wonderful friend come into my life. My dad had a hardware company, an architectural hardware company in Salt Lake City. And he had a protege. He furnished hardware on a lot of the large buildings in Salt Lake and some around the country. And he had this protege, Jack, who worked for him. And the next day after the fire, Jack came to see us and brought his little daughter, Jill. She was 3 and I was 5. And Jill was more my size. She brought me a sack of clothes because all of my clothes had burned up in the fire. And we have been friends ever since. And lifelong friends. We only lived together in Salt Lake. She moved away when she was 12 and I was 14, and she moved to Southern California and has been here ever since. But I've been all over. So 5 years ago when I moved to this general area, I was so thrilled to be near her. And her husband, who I've known for over 40 years, I was their maid of honor, and they live in Mission Viejo. So to me, that's an incredible blessing that came out of that fire. So there's always a blessing. We might have to wait a while to really understand it or get it, but it's always there. Well, since I came to get acquainted with you today and have you help know me better, I want to share with you several of my other blessings. My 2 sons and their families are my great joy and blessing. This is my oldest son, Chris. Both Blair and Ken know Chris. He was in YOU for a long time. And he and his wife, Melanie, they live in Santa Rosa, California, north of the Golden Gate. And he is an operations manager for several restaurants and a sommelier, a wine professional. And his wife works for county animal control. And they have 2 daughters. Kenna on the right, she's 9, going into 4th grade, and Linnea on the left is 6, going into 1st, with their mother. And those are my sweetie pies. I adore my grandchildren and my granddogs. This is Henry in the back. He's their main dog. The black one is Yorba, and he was the service dog they had for a year. He just left. He was first with a prisoner in a prison, and then he had to be with a family to learn how to live with a family. And now he's gone to be to serve someone else. So he was a nice addition for a time. And this is my youngest son, Justin, on the left. It's not a very good, I couldn't find a good close-up, but, and he's an electrician in Minot, North Dakota. And his wife, Bethany, owns a dog grooming business. And both my daughter-in-laws are Aries, and they work with dogs. So, and then their 2 boys. My grandson, Dylan, on the left is 11, and he's in the chicken coop with their 4 chickens. And on the right is Ethan. He's showing off his tooth. And then you'll see a little bit of example of my daughter-in-law Bethany's dog grooming expertise now. This is Marley. He always has the mohawk. He's a Labradoodle, part Labrador, part Poodle. One of the most gentle, loving dogs ever. And then these are the other 2. On the left is Flomar. She's a golden doodle. And on the right is Pearl, a schnoodle, schnauzer poodle. So they all 3 have poodle in them. And this is kind of deceptive because Flomar on the left, look at her long legs, she weighs 70 pounds, and Pearl on the right weighs 9 pounds. And Pearl is the boss. So, anyway, my grand dogs. So those are my blessings. And finally, practicing the presence of God. First of all, I said it's feeling the presence, then it's looking for the good or the blessing in all things, and then finally it's passionately falling in love with God and with the wonders of creation. I love theologian Matthew Fox, and one of the things he says is for us to fall in love at least 3 times a day, whether it's with a flower, a tree, an animal, a person, a collective group of people, a glorious planet. And we can practice the presence of God by falling in love each day. So this weekend, I'm here falling in love with you. And that's really what being a minister, I think, is all about, just loving you through it all. As I began to wrap it up, I have just a few quotes. I want to quote a passage, shamelessly quote a passage from my book. We take our journeys in life to become instruments of love, sacred passion, and power for the transformation and regeneration of all. And we discover that our personal divinity was there all the time. And then there's 2 quotes about fire. Teilhard de Chardin once said, someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And then, for a second time in the history of the world, we will have discovered fire. And the great Sufi poet Rumi said, set your life on fire. Seek those who fan your flames. So if we are meant to be together, it is my prayer that with God we lovingly fan the flames of love and transformation for each other. God bless you. Thank you so much.
That's great. Thank you.